Greeting once again. We're happy to be here to join with all of you today. We've now arrived to our first GatherVerse panel. We ask that our guests, our host, please mute your mics as we prepare to be able to enter into this roundtable discussion, kicking off our 3-day excursion of expression when it comes to the GatherVerse 2024 Roundtable Panel Summit on AI. Before I allow our guests, and we want our guests to be able to introduce themselves, they certainly can carry it better than I can. This month alone has almost been unprecedented in terms of the technology that we're seeing deployed. We're already familiar with stable diffusion and platforms such as Runway when we think about AI and video technology. But on the heels of what feels just 72 hours away, Sora, if you will, last week was deployed by OpenAI, in which the like of many of us, candidly, if we had to be transparent, have never seen any type of video deployment, text-to-model platform released into the world. It's arriving, and it's about that big compared to what's coming. But as we take a look at the different products, we must take a bigger look because right now, countries and continents around the world are preparing AI infrastructure. They're gathering, they're getting ready, not just in public and private sector, but whole entire countries and continents are preparing for this global AI arms race. But let me not tell it. I brought some friends along to be able to express this. But before we dive into this discussion, Elizabeth, will you please let us know who you are?
Hi, can you hear me well?
We hear you. Hello.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Elisabetta, and I'm the CEO and founder of AMIA. AMIA is an education and creative hub for immersive arts and emerging technologies. And we integrate an e-tech academy where we train the talents of the futures from all over the world. And with a hands-on practitioner-driven industry access programs, and alongside the full service where we conceive and produce high-end immersive experiences, of course, with AI also, and the Web3 and the metaverse.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Dr. Kanan, if you could please introduce us briefly to who you are. Dr. Kanan, your mic, sir. Your microphone, sir.
Hi.
Greetings.
Hello, everyone, and it's a pleasant meeting you all. I'm Dr. Hemachandran. I'm from Oxford University, and also I'm the director of AI Research Center. And we work on various emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, metaverse, and also we work on robotics. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Dr. Hemachandran. Michael, we're so happy to have you here, as we're also happy to have everyone that's joined us today. Please introduce who you are briefly.
Well, thank you for having me back. I enjoyed the first summit, and I'm looking forward to this summit as well. So I'm Michael Goldrich. I am the chief advisor of a company called Vivander Advisors, and what we do is we help businesses throughout, actually globally, to actually adopt the technology. We put together a process in which we help large organizations fully embrace the technology, from looking at a comprehensive use case approach to piloting out to ultimately scaling. So that's our approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And Umeng, we're very happy to have you. If you can unmute your mic and share with us briefly who you are.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I'm Umang. I lead a team of cloud architects for Oracle for APAC. Me and my team work with some of the largest enterprises in APAC and helping them understand how to drive business transformation through emerging technologies like AI, like cloud, like analytics, big data, etc. So working with customers and doing early pilots around AI and helping them navigate the human and technical aspects of generative AI.
Thank you for your work, Umeng. We're very happy to have all of you with us today. Shall we begin? Let's chop wood. So what we're looking at, these generative pre-trained transformers, these large language foundational models that we've seen deployed to the world. Here we are in the 2024 season, and it's been since November 2022 where we've seen the arrival of GPT 3.5 and what we've seen with GPT-4, and we've seen several other different models that have come to Sheen, from Bard to Gemini, and several other different platforms for several other different companies. We're seeing platforms such as Perplexity AI gain on the heels of search. Well, at the same time, we're seeing companies like NVIDIA that is now skyrocketed past Amazon. It's becoming, in terms of its value, seemingly coming out of a nowhere space, where a platform that was only looked at as a video game producer when it comes to microchip production has now accelerated and is on a trajectory to quite pass Apple and Microsoft by year's end. And we're seeing these things when it comes to chip wars. We're seeing things that are happening when it comes to the deployment of AI infrastructure tools needed to be able to what? So to that end, let's kick off with the first question, Elizabeth. When we talk about the different nations of the world that are building AI infrastructure, and we look at their approach into AI governance and ethics, how do different nations' approaches to AI governance and ethics impact the global AI landscape from your lens? Your mic, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you for this question, Christopher. Well, as I said, we work like all over the world. We also train people from all over the world, and also corporates, actually. And I would say that what we see is that different nations have taken variety of stances on regulating AI, from complete like laissez-faire to strict oversight. And actually this fragmented landscape makes international cooperation very, very difficult, but very, very important at the same time. So I would say that without a consistent ethical standards, because to be honest, right now we are in a kind of far west as far as Gen AI is concerned. So also irresponsible use of AI could undermine the trust in technology and its benefits. So I would say that like the key word is a cooperation. There was like a very important event. I'm sure that you are aware of that. There was like the AI Safety Summit last November 2023, which was very, very important in terms of cooperation, because like it was like brought together by the UK government, and it saw together like Sam Altman, OpenAI, DeepMind, and also Elon Musk. And it was the summit which led actually to drafting the pledge declaration. But I think that if we don't all work all together, I would say that summing up different kind of approach from nations will lead to we need to have like a stringent regulations, because now there's no like a kind of governance around the AI. And I would say that AI is much more like a governmental problem in this moment. So we need regulations, we need collaborative efforts, and we need divergent approaches to Gen AI.
Let me do a follow-up to that, Elizabeth. Since you're in the EU sector, we talk about the European ecosystem, which you're from and which you live in. I'm also very familiar with some of the dealings that are happening in the European ecosystem. When we talk about unification, obviously, you brought the UK. We've been looking at Brexit, a separation, if you will, from the other different countries of the great continent of Europe. Let me ask you, and let's be frank here, because we know that Europe has already come out with some regulations when it comes to AI. Some people say that it's a little bit too premature to come up with regulations, because we now know, audience, that what happens when the technology becomes more advanced than the technologist? And so now that's come to pass. And so AI is moving at a rapid session. How do you, if policy and legislators can't even tame, if you will, the growing and ascendant rise of these emerging technologies as far as AI and everything that it impacts, how is the EU ecosystem able to do it? One, but feel free to pass that up to answer this. Do you see a showcase of unification happening? Because you mentioned the Safety Summit in November, which was a big deal. Do you see a unification happening within the EU ecosystem surrounding AI?
Not in this moment. I think there's like a quite a good effort, behind the Gen AI, but in this moment, no, I don't see that. So you mentioned before Sora. Of course, like in this moment, we were like with me we launched the Gen AI for Vision Storytelling Masterclass. Like in the middle of that, Sora came up. But like when you have something like a Sora, for instance, that is like you can generate a fantastic, amazing video with just prompting techniques. Think about ethics behind it. So do you have to deliver something so powerful? What is like the power that you put in the hands of creators and artists? Or do you have to like think about that before and just discuss and create regulations at a governmental level? I think it's the second one.
Thank you for sharing, Elizabeth. Dr. Hemachandran, I'm going to route the same question to you. Michael and Aman, we're coming back to you in just a little bit. But Dr. Hemachandran, when we talk about the subject of AI governance and ethics impacting the global AI landscape, what is it that you're seeing, sir? Please unmute your mic. We'll allow you to be able to figure that out. Michael, I'm jumping over to you to be able to answer this question, but Dr. Hemachandra figures out his technicalities. When we see the global AI landscape on an ethical level, Michael, what do you have?
So I kind of will take a short-term, medium-term, and long-term approach for this, and also looking at history. So history, right now we're in, as the section's called, it's a race, right? We had the space race, we had the arms race, and now we have the AI race. And when there are races like this, ultimately there are really two competitors. And these two competitors truly, in my opinion, if you look at data, if you look at the technology, you look at the talent, you probably have two juxtaposing forces. You have the United States and you have China. And I think those two are going to be predominant. And what you're seeing right now is, even with Sora, which you talked about before, the reason why Sora is so much better than Runway and these other technologies is because OpenAI has already built a very sophisticated AI that helped them build this. So those companies or countries that have very sophisticated AIs are going to continue to accelerate way past the other countries until we ultimately come to a point where you have these two juxtaposing AIs. And then I think then the whole world will kind of take a step back and say, okay, how are we going to control these? But I don't believe you'll be able to stop this development until you have these two powers ultimately contrasting against each other. I mean, the European Union, with their human-centric approach, they're kneecapping it because you need data. You got to feed this thing a lot of data. And America's got a lot of data, like Google's got all the YouTube and all that other kind of and social media. And China, they have all the data on all their people and all how they interact. So ultimately, it's going to be once these two kind of ultimately prevail, then we have a lot of these discussions. I think how do we control it will be more relevant. I think it's good to talk about this, but I don't think it's going to slow the progression. At least that's my opinion.
Michael, let me route this back to you, because you mentioned the West and you also mentioned Asia, the juggernaut that's really coming on the heels of the West, if you will. In particular, we could talk about Ernie that was deployed in China. Most people in the West are not even familiar with it. We're really at about 29% adoption rate globally when it comes to these generative models. And we see that happening more at an accelerated fashion. Perhaps we've ventured into the 30%. But might we also consider the open source community? Because I know while we see what's happening with OpenAI and other models and co-pilots with Microsoft and the incredible work that we see Ginseng doing at NVIDIA and Satya commandeering at Microsoft, and then we see what's happening in China. But it seems to me that we look at platforms of what Zuckerberg's doing over with Llama and the work that they're doing, these other open source models on Hugging Face that we see deployed that are some outstanding and extraordinary, but to your point, what has more data and who has more the financial backing to migrate. To say all that, what do we think about when it comes to the open source model? Will that contend?
Well, I think open source is highly egalitarian, but I think really you have to have a profit motive. In my opinion, Zuckerberg released an open source model to really compete with the Googles and to compete with the Microsofts of the world, because he really got impacted when the whole privacy thing happened with Apple, and they took out all the revenue that they're able to have. So I think that is a way for him to stay in the game. But I really think it's really going to go by the dollar. Where do you get the most profit? And I think those companies or those countries that invest to really try to get the maximum gain, either from a financial perspective or from a power perspective, those will prevail. I think the open source will always be kind of like number three in that situation.
You know what I think? You know what I think candidly, and thank you for sharing that, Michael. You know what I think candidly when we look at Sora? I believe, and I've already believed, that AGI has arrived. Hear me out. Let's walk through this. You have some very powerful and thinkful minds to be able to come up with the technology that you deployed with Sora. Who's running that? What's operating that in terms of a large language model? It seems to me, Umang, that when we look at what we see happening and we see what's accelerating, that companies and corporations already have a storied blueprint, Elizabeth, when it comes to deploying products and slow rolling, taking their time, looking to see who's out there competing. And if they have no competitor, they have no urgency to deploy what they already have sitting in their R&D that's ready to be able to come out to the world. I believe, this is me, let the debate begin. But I believe that AGI has not only arrived, but we're seeing that in glimmers, not only with our text to text and conversational AI outputs, but also when we start to look at platforms like Sora. But I have a bigger concern beyond all that, because let those that want to debate about AGI and their rival and the difference between simple and narrow AI, let them have that. Umang, I have a bigger concern, and maybe you share in this concern as well. Are we safe right now with the level and the power of AI that's been deployed into the world? And if not, what should we do about it? Do you have a concern for this, Umang? And audience, while we're at it, how do you feel about AI safety right now? Are you comfortable with what you're seeing right now? The capability of hyper realistic immersive simulations like we're seeing, human eye resolution? There's more that could be said, but Umang, please.
Thanks for that question. See, look, if you look at the history of innovation, right? Regulation has always followed chaotic innovation, whether you look at ride sharing models like Uber, you look at Airbnb kind of models. We're seeing the same disruption happening in the Web3 and blockchain space. So first, there will be a lot of chaotic innovation. And then once we understand the boundaries of those innovation, regulation will follow and things will settle down. And we're seeing the same thing with AI, right? So for example, we spoke about different countries and different regions' perspectives on AI. You have, without naming countries, you have certain EU regions which are more egalitarian in their approach. The focus is more on ethics, openness, whereas you have certain other countries where the focus is more on innovation, but they're possibly compromising on data, right? So there is a lot more facial recognition being done. That's leading to some very innovative use cases in facial recognition. But then what are the implications from a security perspective, right? And those are concerns we all need to understand. So the way I'm seeing it across regions, different countries and different regions are have their own moral standards, if I may say so, for AI and what AI can do, what are the ethical concerns around it, what are the data privacy concerns around it. Whereas companies are innovating and coming up with different models. And this chaotic innovation, I believe, will settle down in some form and shape. And then we'll realize what are the regulations that are needed from a data privacy perspective or from an ethical perspective, data collection perspective, etc., that are needed. And then I expect there'll be some global standards around this, whether they are driven by the UN, whether driven by IEEE, for example, or other organizations on what some of those standards will be. I think those are things that we'll see over time.
But Umang, let me jump back on this with you, and let's dance for a little bit, shall we? And thank you for sharing your expressions thus far. I think it begs to be said that, sure, we can see that when it comes to the deployment of these models and companies being able to iron their way or to be able to sort out the wrinkles, if you will, on the corporate level, and certainly we always seems to find the public sector catching up. But here's the deal. Let's look at this for a second. We've never been this way before, because in some ways, I believe that we've escaped under the chasms of product and we've arrived into what we're looking at applied sciences. And my concern is that whether Microsoft or Meta will be able to figure this out and sort it out in Gemini. I believe they will. My bigger concern is the countries and the innovators and the hackers, the makers and the builders out there. Shout out to the hacker community, the good ones, but the hacker communities that aren't so good also have access to this type of science, not product, this type of science. How can you put a lid and a cap over this? And do we have enough infrastructure in terms of deterring to be able to combat what we're seeing? The reason I say this, and I believe it's valid, whenever we see a new technology enter into the eco habitat, if you will, and it comes into the consumer side of things, such as drones, we all loved drones. We enjoyed it. We enjoyed seeing them and playing with them. But we also knew that drones could be used in a state of warfare. Years later, we now see drone warfare, unfortunately, happening in this world. My concern, Umang, is when we look at this technology, we know it's not perfect, but are nations doing enough to be able to help enter into a safe and environmental system, as Elizabeth talked about when it came in November in this safety summit? Are we doing enough? Are we moving fast enough, Umang?
Very interesting question. See, there's a lot of debate around this. There is a lot of debate around potential weaponization of AI for automated weapon systems, for example, right? And we've got two major wars in the world right now, right? There are questions around the usage of AI in weapon systems in these two wars and what else can be done with them in the future. So there are some real challenges that we all have to see, right? So for example, there are specific national security concerns around usage of AI for surveillance, usage of AI for cyber warfare and cyber terrorism at a national level or at an enterprise level. Right now, unfortunately, there are no standards around it because there is still a lot of chaotic innovation happening. But I've seen initial discussions happen on setting up some global standards around AI, right? So IEEE is doing some work around it. There've been some very initial discussions around it, but I think a lot more work has to be done to make to reduce the weaponization of AI and sort of control it. Uh, so yeah, that's to your point.
Thank you,
I,
Umang. Please, Dr. Ramachandran, please.
yeah, Christopher. First of all, uh, the the whatever you are speaking, I can't able to hear it properly. I have a network issue with you, but I can hear clearly from Umag, Michael, and Elsabetta. So I'm just giving this information. So just I want to add some point with Mr. Umar. Same in India, if you see that there are a lot of regulatory bodies are there, like India AI, NASCOM. Those people are there where they have a regulatory body where if any people going to have startup in the area of AI, then they are approaching them and they are getting guidance from them and they are building the AI tool and they're launching into the market. That is what they are doing it. But when you see this, in 2023 May, there is one fake, deep fake uh, image has been generated by AI, bomb blast in Pentagon, and they posted in social media where it affects the total stock market, and there is a lot of crash happened, and they later on they identified that it's a fake image has been created by generative AI, and they posted in social media. It happened in 2023. So country to country there are a lot of differences and lot of standards need to be followed. As I just accept that what Umang has said, the same thing, the global standard should be happen. And also, not only India, we need to form a team with a group of country and they need to form a standard and it should be followed. And if you see, uh, normal people doesn't have any awareness on that, how to use the AI. Only if you go and approach, they are giving it. But if the government has been providing a clear policy and standards and ethics, what need to be done when you are using a mobile phone, in a mobile phone, if you have AI, how to be used it. So this basic instructions should be given to all the people and to the society. That helps the people to use how we can initially use the AI without harming the others. In that way we can do it.
Thank you, Dr. Hemachandran. I don't know if you can hear me yet, but Thank you for sharing your expressions in words, and hopefully you could read my lips. But let's go in to be able to route over to this, since we're discussing and having this discussion right now. We've talked about AI safety audience, and we've also talked about ethics in our outlook when we look at this behemoth technology that has arrived at this AI arms race, and that we're thinking, hey, maybe they arrived to a point where we start to look at who are the top two and can the two biggest kids on the block get along, or are we about to look at something much more treacherous when it comes to the communication and interaction? But here's what I also want to take a look at, Elizabeth, when we take a more expansive look. When we think on considerations, audience, of a global cloud consensus, where we, the people, if you will, the technologists and the inventors, explorers, the creatives, the ethicists, if you will, the educators, and more, how do we come together? Because Umang brought up IEEE, but IEEE is that big in the scheme of things, and the majority of technologists have no idea what IEEE is, but IEEE does do good work. Shout out to IEEE. Those who don't know what they are, don't know who they are, I suggest that you go take a look at them. They do incredible work, but they are held back because it seems to me, Elizabeth, that organizations and platforms that work at the level of human betterment, whether it's UNESCO or UN, or we're looking at World Economic Forum or others, and even so many other ones that we don't hear about, they're held back because they simply do not have the capital and the wherewithal to be able to contribute ethically, to be able to make what we innovate better and more sound. So now we're left in a situation where it's up to, if you will, the mercy of these technology companies and corporations and governments to be able to regulate. How do we create a global cloud consensus to be able to internationally, to be able to start really tackling and being able to champion the way forward, to build out the necessary standards and to equip those with relevant and necessary information on the legislative side? And when we look at policy, how do we go about this? Or is this something that's too late? Your mic, please.
Thank you for this easy question, Christopher. Thank you so much. It's quite difficult, of course. We're not late at all, because we're like, I can see like from our perspective that we have like a baby Gen AI, let's say like 5 or 6 years old in this moment. Okay, even if it's just like we're talking about that, we've been talking about that for the last year. But I would say that we talked about also regulations or agreements, which are very, very, very important, and also like how the private sector is actually helping, Gen AI to be more ethical. I would say that, first of all, a few perspectives. Global regulations and agreements, or even when, they will impact, all of us and companies, also the private sector, working with the Gen AI, can potentially manage the competitive aspects of AI arms race, but success, from my perspective, depends on cooperation among nations and among companies. So like also see companies not as a competitor, but as a partner. Transparency, which is massively important, because for instance, when we teach, we taught over 200 people from all over the world, also larger corporations, and now we're teaching over 1,000 people. And we teach how you can become the creative director with your Gen AI tools assistants, but where ethics is massively important, because when I saw Sora, of course I said, okay, we have things to decide here. What is the balance between being ethical or just being profitable? Because it's massively important what is happening, and it's just the beginning. And then innovation incentives, because it's very important also to give incentives, but also balancing these ethical aspects. Strong enforcement, which in this moment is just in the hands of a few, but instead we need to be more have a shareable environment, and also I would say adaptability to technological changes. I work in education, production, research, and also work with students, C-levels, artists, professionals, and even the schools, the university, because also design educational project for schools. They are terrified about Gen AI. Instead, we'll never go back. It will move forward. So you need to understand it. You need to educate people, because otherwise, what we will have right now, I'm also a mom, we will have a generation of cat and paste people, which is very, 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 terrifying. And you mentioned before private companies and nations. We have this very unbalanced moment with the US and China, which is something that not many people are aware of. What is feeding Gen AI in this moment, let's say 90% comes from US and China, which means that the culture in Gen AI is that one. We need to balance the situation.
You may have just hit the hammer on the head. For me personally, one of my biggest concerns about the deployment of these models, and I'm here in Silicon Valley, the heart of where this is being developed, and I'm very familiar with our capability to be able to render out technologies at an accelerated fashion. My real concern is Western bias. My real concern is Asian specific bias. My real concern is that there's so many nations around this world that don't even have broadband access to be able to contribute to the greater development of the data that needs to be deployed in these models. And that is a problem, is it not?
Exactly. I totally agree. Because what is happening right now is that, a few companies can invest in Gen AI, and this will lead to a larger disparity, among all nations that are instead in need, and they cannot stay behind. So when we talk about ethics, it means sometimes it's like people think there is like a nice word to say, but instead it's very difficult, to apply ethics behind such Gen AI, which is massively not only important but powerful. And the risk to divide the nations, companies, people, and culture is huge in this moment.
The eco-culture, the human characteristics that are permeated in and throughout technological ecosystems should not be forsaken. We should not have one ascendancy of dominant developed AI in any place in this world. It must be democratized so that more people can have more greater cultural contribution. If we're going to extend reality, then we must bring reality with it. Michael, I'm rendezvousing over to you when we talk about the role of private corporations and the international competition for AI supremacy, with the caveat added that when we look at this global AI race specifically, and you work in private sector and you work with companies and corporations and being able to help develop out their organizational structures and more, when we start to look at AI, let's look at it. I was passing by the NVIDIA campus. I've never seen it that packed, that many people that are working there, because all of a sudden NVIDIA just shot over $1 trillion in value, and they're hiring people at a rapid clip. But some companies are doing massive layoffs at a rapid clip. And so it's very topsy-turvy with what we're seeing here. And when we look at these companies and corporations, some of these corporations, if they stay on this trajectory, they will be more valuable than many of the countries in this world. Here's my question. When we look at AI supremacy and the ascendant rise of corporations, what are your open thoughts? Is this healthy when it comes to the global ecosystem and infrastructure, when it comes to commerce and business?
Well, my opinion is this. So every device in the future right now that requires electricity has a power on, and every device will have AI involved in it. So we're going to start to interact not just with people, but we're going to start to interact with things. Now, in terms of your question about private enterprise, I think that private enterprise is incentivized to drive revenue, to make money for at least the United States, and I think globally for the stockholder. They'll do everything they can to continue to do that in an accelerated pace. But I think, and what will stop that? I think what's going to stop that, and I think if we look at history, because I think history is probably the best indicator of what happens in the future, is if we look at bad things that happened in the past and how the world has responded. So World War II. World War II, terrible war. We created the United Nations to help try to prevent stuff like that from happening again. I imagine that with AI, while I think a lot of the stuff we're talking about now is academic in terms of how we would like corporations to handle this, I think based on how they feed the content and how they, give information into these neural networks, they don't even necessarily know, since it's not rule-based, they can't really specifically control what it does or doesn't do. So they have to constantly build new models. But until something bad happens, then the world will wake up and say, this is what we need to do. But it might be, to your point about Sora and AGI, once, humans can't beat an AI in chess. Humans can't beat AI in Go. Eventually, humans won't be able to beat this in whatever it is next. So I'm a little bit pessimistic, but I think that things will continue to go. Companies will continue to develop until something really bad happens, and then the world will try to kneecap it. And whether that we're successful or not at that point, that remains to be determined.
And what do you think about it begs to be followed up on the subject of UBI, UBS, universal basic income and responsibility on the corporate level, as opposed to putting all the pressure on the shoulders of, let's say, the public sector and governments when it comes to the great disruption that we're seeing now, and we believe we'll be seeing even more in the change of the ecosystem of the eco-environment of work itself. Do you think that there will be more help coming from these corporations that have deployed these models, and to be able for re-education and to be able to help make sense of this disruption that they've brought to the table?
That's an interesting question. I think that there'll probably be a lot of pressure on that, but I think ultimately also there needs to be a change of perception of what jobs add value. So right now, people or kids want jobs that are going to make them the most money. But right now, a lot of these jobs will be able to be automated, like stockbrokers, a lot of these analyst jobs. So really what's going to be valuable in the future are people that provide care, people that provide support, the hands-on work. So I think while companies will be important to kind of help that, but I think there needs to be a shift of perception as to when a lot of this knowledge work can be automated, then really it is focusing back on the people. And this type of service to help people needs to be looked at as something valuable versus something, oh, I do it because I can't get these other jobs. So I think it's those things. I think there's going to be pressure to tax these organizations. Now, whether that's successful or not, who knows? But I think there needs to be also a change of perception of what is a valuable, good job.
It's a very fine point that's made. Dr. Hemachandran.
Yeah. So as we are from education sector, so we are using this generative AI and metaverse as a new innovation pedagogy in the education system. Like we are creating an avatar in the metaverse, and we are connected with the generative AI, and that avatar is being trained with the course content. For example, I am teaching machine learning for the students, where my course content, whatever I have created for my classroom, that course content will be trained with the generative AI, and it will be given to the students, where the students can access in the metaverse environment, like our classroom environment which we created, or they can use the desktop or even in mobile. In three various platforms, they can use the chat GPT. So no, sorry, they use the chat generative AI chatbot which we have created, and they can ask any questions related to machine learning. What are the courses? What are the topics which we have taken? They can look into that, and they can get the answer to that, and they can well prepared for the exam. That what we do it here. And because when you train any generative AI with general kind of database, where it doesn't, like in chat GPT, if you ask who am I, it won't answer properly, because it it's been trained with n number of data. But when you train a specific model with a defined data, then we can use it for a specific purpose. That's what we do in our education sector, especially at Watson.
And thank you, Dr. Hemachandran. And Umang, we'll jump over to you with this next question, but may I add the caveat there? It's very interesting when we think about humans training data and training these models with the data, but we're really close on the heels where AI will be training itself, and it will be leveraging its own self and its own impression of what it is that it believes that it should be learning, guided, yes, by humans, if you will, until humans can guide no more in that specific sector. But that's a whole another bit in and of itself, if you will. Among when we look at the AI arms race and the global economic disparities and digital divides, we're already seeing a severe loss of jobs, but I believe we haven't seen anything yet. But At the same time, we know that AI will help create jobs. It's helping a lot of people to become more productive and more to work. But there's a disparity gap. We've already had a gap when it comes to technical literacy, if you will, but we're starting to see the divide happen even more. What are we doing here? What are we really doing here when it comes to AI and saying, hey, we celebrate these innovative breakthroughs, but at the same time, not everybody's so celebratory as many of us here are in the West and other different regions around the world. What are you looking at with this?
So it's a very valid concern, right? We're seeing that AI is widening the digital gap between countries, right? So, for example, one, wealthier nations and large corporations can dedicate more resources to AI research and development. And that creates a technological advantage that's difficult for some emerging countries to bridge. Second is the data access and infrastructure. So, for AI, you need good quality, high quality data and that training compute infrastructure. Again, emerging economies, emerging countries have a little bit of catching up to do. So that again widens the digital divide. Third is skilled workforce, right? So maintaining these AI systems requires some specialized skills, and education systems also have to evolve to make sure there are enough engineers to meet that gap. So that's widening the gap between countries. What can be done? First, what you can do is, interestingly, we've seen in the past, some emerging countries actually leapfrog technologies and catch up very, very fast. We've seen what's happened in Kenya in mobile payment. We're seeing what's happening in India in a lot of digital payments. So that's the opportunity for developing countries to invest in AI, right? And that gives them a chance to catch up. Second is there needs to be international cooperation. We've spoken about IEEE, OECD. There are things being done by UNESCO and other bodies in bringing about international cooperation in AI research and development, which can help level the playing field. We spoke about open source. Hugging Face is playing a big role in giving free access, open source access to open source libraries around toxicity, around bias reduction, gender bias reduction, etc., or giving access to pre-trained models that anybody can leverage. So they are a big leveler, so to say. And third, emerging countries can look at AI to address development challenges, right, in areas like healthcare or agriculture or education, like Hema was saying. So I think these are some of the areas where countries can be innovative in trying to bridge that digital gap that's emerging between rich and the emerging economies.
Thank you for sharing that, Umang. Elizabeth, I want to ask you something because the work in the body of work that you do to this day is extraordinary. It seems to me that when we take smaller countries or larger countries, it seems like the role of the responsibility will fall back to some degree on the technologist to become the educator. Is education the way to go when we start looking at how economies participate effectively in the global AI race? And what I mean by that is when we think about the contribution of information to be able to get all countries up to an even playing field, if you will, on an even level when it comes to the deployment and adoption of these models, do we have to go back to first principles and become educators to say, listen, we've deployed this technology, it's accelerated, it's arriving fast. Some are more equipped to be able to adopt and to be able to access these technologies much faster than others. Do we have to play the role of the educator and maybe tone down from what we even want to be able to deal with and do when it comes to product development and product release and creation? And when we look at that, is there an overall benefit where we contribute to the overall growth of our local and near societies?
And the answer is yes, because as I said, we have like different kind of perspectives because we work with artists, professionals, C-levels, corporates. We design for universities, so we're like we can see the entire ecosystem and what is happening right now. But not only with Gen AI, to be honest, with all the hype. Okay, so we had the hype with the metaverse, we had the hype of XR, now the hype with AI, and of course the hype with spatial computing. But and when this happens, is that corporate from their side, they just are creating this kind of peculiar strategy, which is called the strategy of the hype, which makes me laugh like crazy, because what is the strategy of the hype? Excuse me. So you run after a hype, and then what's happening? So they don't understand actually what is happening and how they can use, in this case, we're talking about Gen AI on a transversal level of their company. So they just follow the hype, what's happening, what the others are doing. So they need to be educated to understand what is the potential of Gen AI in this case, and how you can use it, but also we're like injecting this fuel of ethical behavior, which particularly for me and for us is most important. And then you have on the other side students who are actually taking advantage of LLM. I'm not talking about like all the Gen AI tools to create like images or videos whatsoever, things that we're also teaching. And if we don't educate schools and teachers, trust me, we will have like a generation of cut and paste, which is very scary, to be honest. And then you have the schools and universities, or academies, universities. Gen AI is a kind of helper in this moment, okay? So we cannot like work with AI. We cannot teach to use like our students to use Gen AI. And instead, I think our role of all of us in our like industry, tech industry, immersive industries, is most important to become educators in everything we do. It's very, very important. Otherwise, we cannot create our evolution. I don't talk about innovation, but more evolution.
And with that said, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, our panelists and roundtable. Might we leave you, audience, with this note, which I think was perfectly left by Elizabeth Rotolo. Might we consider being able to wear more than one hat? And might we adopt and subscribe to the ideals of becoming educators? Because we have a whole entire set of generations that are coming, and they're looking and saying, my goodness, what have you left us? What have you passed on to us? Might we leave things a little bit better than we found them, and leave the light on when we're on that path? Thank you, Roundtablers, for joining us at our first summit. We have Dr. Bokenfield coming up next. May our gather continue to be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.